main uh, agenda of today's webinar. That is, we will have three lectures followed by question and answer sessions. We have three distinguished speakers who have huge experience in nutrition, including critical care nutrition from India. They are Dr. Ashwin Dabi, President of Indian Association for Parenteral and Enteral Nutrition. Next speaker would be Dr. Radha Reddy Tada, who is lead clinical dietitian and head of Department of Clinical Nutrition and Dietetics at AIG Hospitals, Hyderabad. And Daphne Lovesley, chief dietitian and head, Department of Dietetics, Apollo Hospitals, Chennai. I would like to extend warm welcome to all the distinguished speakers, and I'm thankful to them for accepting our invitation and sharing some insights into critical nutrition, which is slowly growing in Nepal. I hope with their huge and long-term experience in critical care nutrition, our audiences, including intensivists, other doctors, nurses, and paramedical staff, will benefit hugely. And for this webinar, I'm especially thankful to our chairpersons, and I would like to introduce our chairpersons now. We have two chairpersons, Professor Dr. Subhas Prasad Acharya. Welcome, sir. Professor Dr. Subhas Acharya is the head of intensive care unit and professor of anesthesiology at Tribhuvan University Teaching Hospital. He has contributed a lot in the development of critical care medicine in Nepal, overall in terms of clinical services as well as other paramedical services. So I would like to welcome Professor Dr. Subhas and thank you for chairing this session.
Thank you, Aim. Thanks to all the speakers and participants for joining the session. We look forward for a great learning experience. Thank you.
Next, I would like to welcome and thank Dr. Diptesh Aryal, who is lead intensivist and coordinator of critical care at Nepal Medicity Hospital. He also has big experience in establishing critical care units and establishing them in various aspects, including all aspects of critical care services. He is currently working at Nepal Medicity Hospital. Thank you, Dr. Diptesh, for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And thank you to the organizers for giving me this opportunity. It's a privilege. And I'm so happy that our dietitians and nutritionists are taking the leadership role in conducting this kind of programs. And I believe like this kind of program will help empower our clinical dietitians and nutritionists in ICUs and beyond. And I'm especially thankful to all our speakers for giving us this opportunity to hear from them. And I'm here to learn a few more things today. Thank you.
Thank you, chairpersons. Now, without delay, I would like to invite and welcome first speaker, Dr. Ashwin Dabi. Dr. Ashwin is president of Indian Association for Parenteral and Enteral Nutrition, who has academic excellence in critical care as well as nutrition. He has done ESPE and diploma. He is an associated editor for Clinical Nutrition Experimental. He is also a member contributor for ESPE and 2020 guidelines on nutrition in kidney failure and hospital food. He also has several publications, including ESPE and position paper on nutrition in COVID-19 in collaboration with WHO experts. And he is overall learned nutritionist as well as a clinician at India and is leading IAPEN. Welcome, sir, and thank you for your time. And you can now proceed with your talk.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hem Panaru, for such a wonderful and kind words. And thanks a lot, Nepal Dietetic Association, Nepalese Societies of Critical Care Medicine, and Critical Care Nursing Association of Nepal. Warm greetings from IAPN India Association. And I am based at Ahmedabad, the western part of India. And we are privileged to be part of this wonderful international conference on important role of nutrition in critical care scenario. Thank you so much, Dr. Subhas, Dr. Diptesh, and nonetheless, Nani Shua Sakya, for being such a wonderful student. So thank you all for your kind words. And with that, I welcome you all on this wonderful platform to sensitize all about what is all going on in the field of clinical nutrition and what are the recent evidences and how best we can improve the outcome in a patient with critical illnesses. So I was given this task, all of just to elaborate more on. There is a generally, we being a doctor, our main concentration is focused on the medicine therapeutics and any other renal replacement therapy or the mechanical ventilation or the antibiotic stewardships. But we found from quite a few publications that now we have enough evidence that if you aim to achieve a good nutrition support early in the course of critical illness, you will have the mortality and morbidity benefits. So the aims of my presentation is to elaborate on the different approach in nutrition intervention in patients with critical illnesses and how best we can evaluate during the nutritional assessment, because sometimes we do not have enough time and the prompt response from the nutritionist is always recommended. Also, to plan a nutrition support, that is very important that various modalities of nutrition interventions are now we have to provide the energy, protein, and the special substrates. So I just want to make all of you familiar with the concept of nutrition support in critical care setup. So these are my contents of the presentation. So firstly, when it comes to malnutrition, generally when we were in a medical school or when we were taught during our physiology classes, that once we become cachectic, we thought that yes, this person or patient is nutritionally depleted. But all of you know that the scenario has changed, and various organizations now they have accepted a broad definition of malnutrition, in which a deficiency, excess or imbalance of energy, protein or any other nutrient, whether it is a vitamin D deficiency. We learned from the COVID pandemic that lowest vitamin D had a highest mortality with a COVID respiratory failure. So these are very important, that malnutrition doesn't mean only undernutrition. Malnutrition, therefore, it includes both under and overnutrition. And that is why what we want to incorporate from today's scenario, that it is a inflammation, which is a critical pathophysiological marker, which drives the hypercatabolic state in a patients with critical illnesses. And that leads to abnormal body composition in form of loss of muscle mass or lean body mass. And subsequently, there is a impaired functions that leads to immunodeficiency state. And also overnutrition, what we thought that obesity is also, that leads to a kind of compromised immune response, and that is also considered as a form of malnutrition. Point apart this, we thought that there is a double burden of under and over nutrition, but now we have a triple burden. The most important, as I already elaborated, is a micronutrient deficiency, or we call it a hidden hunger. So this is very important. If you are deficient in one micronutrient, then also you will have an impaired body function. So this is always crucial when we check the body composition of female versus male, you know that there are gender-wise differences. As females, they have a more of a fat mass compared to the males. They have a more of a muscle mass and the mineral mass. So this is a basic difference between the male and female. And there are enough data that the first publication, which came from Dr. Charles Butterworth from Britain, that many reports worldwide, they estimated the prevalence of malnutrition is up to 70% of hospitalized patients. So that is an enormous burden. So this is like wonderful study, a survey done by my good friend, Dr. Michael Hismayer from Austria, wherein which it's a part of their nutrition day survey across the various hospitals in Europe. And what they looked at, that on the within 24 hours of admission, they did the nutrition screening. And what they found, that close to 50% of the patient, they reported, weight loss 6 months before the hospitalization. And it was this weight losing patient had a subsequent length of stay, which was 50% longer than those people who were healthy on admission. So this is a dramatic challenge that we thought that we must improve the nutritional status of hospitalized patient. So very quickly, I just want to elaborate on the how best we can identify the vulnerable people. So one of the very primitive tasks is to do the nutrition screening, which generally do not take more than a minute or two. So there are various tools which are available, and our aim is to identify those people with a low body mass index, or those people who had a unintentional weight loss, or those people there was a reduced dietary intake. So this is all medium and high risk identified patients whom, if we offer the nutritional care plan, then this is going to improve the outcome in a critical care scenario. So nutrition screening, I know that Dr. Radha Reddy is going to cover, but it is briefly just taking a questionnaire in form of like what is the weight loss, if any, or what is the appetite, if there is a loss in appetite. So these are all some basic anthropometric parameters which we can routinely check day in and day out. If you look at these cartoons, that the person who is on the ventilator, he seems to be looks overall healthy, and the person, the cartoon at the bottom, looks little bit emaciated with all the subscapular, infraclavicular, intercostal muscles are wasted. So from apparently we believe that the person in the top cartoon is healthy, but it's not so. So when we perform the nutritional assessment by using subjective global assessment, which is widely adopted in the North American countries, this person looks like suffering from an acute malnutrition, or we may sometimes call it a kwashiorkor. So this is very important, that just from the anthropometric data, we cannot come to any conclusion whether this person is malnourished or he is at risk of malnutrition. So like situation in India and Nepal are more or less similar, because in a good tertiary care center, we have all the technically skilled dietetic professionals who are well versed with all these assessment and screening tools. But like many hospitals in our countries, they do not have an established nutrition support team. So therefore, we believe that we should categorize the patient at risk of malnutrition. So that is all depends upon the brief and quick clinical assessment from our side. So this is very important. Coming to this wonderful publication from Netherlands by Dr. Mears, and that what they did, that they three group of people they choose. One group of people, they were in the elderly people in the hospital who were mandatorily screened, and they underwent a nutrition intervention. And then the other elderly people who were lying in a nursing homes in the communities. And the third elderly people, those who were free living in the community with all alone or maybe with their children. And what they observed over a period of next few years, in those patients whom they did the mandatory nutritional screening for elderly people in hospital and nursing home, there was no decline, not much decline in the nutritional status over a period of next few years. Compared to those people, elderly people who were residing in the community and who were on their own, there was a drastic reduction in the nutritional states. So this is an alarming situation. So to summarize that, the reliable and validated tools are available for nutritional screening and assessment, but because of the, sometimes too much of work, screenings are not routinely performed, and therefore malnutrition continues to go unidentified and the opportunity for early intervention is often missed. So it is very important to screen the patient. Like for example, in a critical care setup, we can simply look at whether there is any depleted reserves, loss of muscle mass, or if at all patient gives that he hasn't eaten for almost 5 days before admission, or there is an impaired bowel function, critical illnesses, or this patient like somebody with an intracranial hemorrhage and coma, those who are in a or somebody with an perforated peptic ulcer with septic peritonitis, and we believe that this patient will require a prolonged bowel rest. So these are the few indicators where we think that we should be optimizing the nutritional support. So that was all about the prevalence definition of malnutrition. Coming to the causes of malnutrition, they are multifactorial. One problem is that, as very rightly mentioned by Dr. Ham, that countries like India and Nepal, still we are in scarcity of skilled, technically defined dietetic professionals. Apart from that, there is an insufficient dietary intake, maybe because of the altered taste, or maybe because of the illness, or maybe because of the drugs we prescribe, or sometimes the disease itself is catabolic, like severe burn or severe acute necrotizing pancreatitis. And therefore, this is very embarrassing for us not to screen the patient, and we miss the train, and then this patient develop a long-term critical illnesses. If you look at the other way around, like there are also problems with the patients, like because elderly people, they have a difficulty in chewing, or because of the disease like cancer or chemotherapy, they have anorexia, or because of the neurocognitive decline, they do not eat. Like so lots of elderly people, they are freely living on their own, or they are isolated by their children. So these are all number of reasons. Or if you look at the institutional level, like many institutes, they do not have any defined nutritional intervention policy, or there are limited catering staff and the provision to deliver the nutritional support. And also, as I understood, the situation in Nepal, that there is a lack of specialist posts. So these are all, very distinguished factors, apart from the healthcare worker related. Like most of the medical professional, they learn very few things during their undergraduate and postgraduate studies about the nutrition. And compared to that, the dietitians, they learn a lot about theories during their bachelor's and master's degrees, but they do not have a applied knowledge in the hospital. So this is all problem which leads to insufficient energy and nutrient intake, and that finally leads to disease related malnutrition. So the causes of malnutrition are multifactorial, and therefore this multi-stakeholder approach is required to tackle the deadly malnutrition situation across the centers in countries like India and Nepal. We already understood that the malnutrition is associated with increased septic complication, decrease and delayed wound healing, compromised immune response, and secondary bacterial and fungal infections, increased length of stay, increased length of ICU stay, ventilatory days, increased need for renal replacement therapy, and number of morbidities are related to malnutrition. And therefore this becomes that these people, they spend quite a few weeks in the hospital, and that leads to a really skyrocketing burden to the country in form of increasing healthcare cost. This was a wonderful study published by my colleague Dr. Tommy Söderholm from Sweden. And what they studied, that on the day of discharge, they grouped patients into those patients who lost lean body mass. They categorized them into protein energy malnutrition, nourished patient, and then those people who remain healthy during the stay, to categorize them as a non-protein energy malnourished patient. And they observed them for a year after the day of discharge. And surprisingly, what they noticed, that the impact of malnutrition remained for significant period after the patients were discharged from the hospital, and the mortality was almost 3 to 4 times higher in those patients who lost protein energy lean body mass during the hospital stay. So this is very a catastrophic situation. And therefore, as we understood that malnutrition increases the health resources, because these people, they are frequently admitted to the hospital. Readmission rates are very high. They generally do not get discharged from the hospital. If they are in the community, then they frequently visit their family doctors, or they are frequently readmitted. So all this leads to burden to the society, and this is we do not want as a part of sustainable development goals. So that is all about the pathophysiology and the prevalence and the impact of malnutrition on the critically ill patient. Very quickly, we just like that, once we identify the nutritional status, we just like to deliver what are the energy and protein needs. Then there is a confusion that many patients are cachectics, many patients are overweight and obese. So as we understood that the fat is a metabolically inert, and muscles are the only metabolically active organ. So therefore, we generally, for overweight and obese people, we just like to calculate the ideal body weight. You can look at these calculation methods. Or in patients, those who are healthy or those who are underweight, we always prefer to take the actual body weight. So this is in critical care scenario. Generally, since countries like India and Nepal, we do not have sophisticated equipment like indirect calorimetry. So we always use the rule of thumb, that is 25 to 30 kilocalorie per kilogram body weight per day. And then we scratch our head that how are we going to satisfy this energy needs? So generally, broadly speaking, these are the broad ranges of carbohydrate, fat, and the protein provisions. Say for example, somebody who has a stress hyperglycemia or an established diabetes, we prefer to give low carbohydrate, or else otherwise we just like to give 2/3 calories from the carbohydrate and 1/3 from the lipids. Similarly, in difficult to treat hyperglycemia, we may increase the calories from fat up to 35. Sometimes we may jump up to 40%. And the proteins, generally in healthy state, we give 10% when we are free living in the communities, but critically ill patients, generally we like to give higher amount of proteins. But proteins, generally we do not count as a part of calories. Proteins we prefer to give like in gram per kilogram body weight. So it all depends upon whether the patient is young adult or elderly, or somebody has a chronic catabolic disease like heart failure or COPD or chronic liver disease, or this patient has got a hypermetabolic state like severe sepsis or burns polytrauma or pancreatitis, where we prefer to give up to 2 gram per kilogram body weight per day. So that all depends upon the state of the patient, and therefore this management of malnutrition, the key is to early identify. So therefore there is a potential role of the dietetic professional, so that they, once they screen the patient and identify, then we have a range of options, right from doing a one-on-one dietary counseling, optimize the oral strategies first. If that is not found to be sufficient, we take the help of oral nutritional supplement. And then if that is not sufficient, we jump to enteral tube feeding or the parenteral nutrition or any combination of these protocols. So these are all based on the SPAN protocol. And similarly, there is a pathways for making decisions in the critical care setup, where generally we believe that when gut is functioning, our first preference is to use the gut. And we learned that enteral nutrition has got, and apart from the energy and protein, there is a protective role in preventing the multi-organ dysfunction syndrome. But if there is a no chance of using the gut, in that case, we cannot keep the patient fasted. We have to give the nutrition. So when there are absolute contraindication to the use of gut, then we must use parenteral nutrition early in the course of critical illnesses. So these are all means of giving the enteral and parenteral nutrition, which my colleague Dr. Radha and Daphne will cover up in their talks. This was a very recently laid down guidelines by the European Society, Dr. Pierre Singer and group. And what they thought, that all patients who are not expected to be on a normal nutrition within 3 days. So this European people are very aggressive. They start parenteral nutrition within 24 to 48 hours. There is a contraindication to enteral nutrition, or early in the course of illness, if we are not able to optimize the oral and enteral nutrition. So therefore, there is a role of supplementary parenteral nutrition. So there are a number of strategies which will be covered up by Radha and Daphne. Coming to the main part is the nutrition care process. All of you know that once patients are admitted, generally as a part of a protocol, we do the assessment within 24 hours. We diagnose the nutritional inadequacy, and then we do the nutritional intervention. And next few days we monitor, reevaluate, and this cycle goes on. So this is known as a nutrition care process. So depending on the patient's progress, we keep on changing our nutritional strategies. And the key role is played by the dietitians in this place, because you know that they are involved at each and every step of nutrition care process. Say, for example, they will assess the nutrition assessment on arrival. They will identify the nutritional inadequacy and will discuss with the treating doctors. And then will interact and coordinate with all members of the healthcare team to make a very good nutrition care plan, so that these patients, they get the best out of nutritional intervention, because we just want to reduce the morbidity and mortality. So therefore the consultation of dietetic professionals before and after any procedure, whether it is a surgery, say for example, as a pre-operative protocol, we take the physician's clearance. So similarly, for a major surgery, as a part of pre-operative protocol, we should be doing the nutritional clearance. We should be taking the nutritional clearance from the dietetic professionals. So this is very importantly, because they regularly meet with the physicians who refer the patient to them, and they have a habit of doing the nutritional counseling. Many a times they are doing it one-on-one and spend so much of time with the patient. So all the parts to encourage the patient, they educate the family, they make sure that the breakfast, lunches, dinner, or in between snacks are given on time to the patients. They will understand the likes and dislikes of the patient. Like whenever we go to any resort or any holiday destination, on arrival they give us some kind of welcome drink. So whenever, similarly, when the patient lands up, we believe food first after patients are hemodynamically stabilized. So this is all very individualized plan they offer to every patient. They identify the disease specific, whether it is a renal failure, heart failure, diabetes. So this is all lot of things done by this skilled professionals. So what else we want? So this is very important that as a medical professionals also we should be developing a link with the dietetic department, and that is where we should be taking the help of not only dietitians but also the nutrition support nurses, or we call it nutrition linked nurses, who are specialized in delivering the whatever is being told by doctors and dietitians to, finally it is a job of nurse to deliver those enteral and parental nutrition, because if everything we write in a wonderful way, in a piece of paper about the energy, protein, type of feed, their quantity, quality, but it is up to the final delivery is done by the nurses. So nurses has got an potentially important role in the nutrition support team. And also we can recruit the dietetic assistants, because many hospitals are so big that their kitchen staffs are always on toes, because every patient is heterogeneous and their dietary requirements are also separate. So these are all number of people which are required to deliver the optimum nutritional support. And we call these people nutrition support team. So the leader of the team is a physician with a special training in clinical nutrition, nurses, registered dietitians. Pharmacist has an important role, because many a times in the enteral nutrition, we want to give 2 gram per kilogram body weight of protein, but most of the formulas, they have only 1 gram. They can meet up to 1 gram per kilogram body weight. So pharmacist is the one important person who will guide us that which enteral or parenteral nutrition formula is good for this patient. Then the medical technologist and the social worker. So this is very important. I just want to elaborate that if you do not have a nutrition support team, then it is very wise to launch the one such team in every hospital and do the audit of what is all going on. So this is the one peak I downloaded from the internet, the one from Bartholomew Hospital. You can see the attending physician, resident doctors, pharmacists, dietitians, dietetic assistant, nurses, and you can see these patients with intestinal failure is on the parenteral nutrition. So this is very important to understand the role of a good nutrition support team. So the recommendation is, as I told you, that the awareness, training, and education are central to the success of nutritional support team. And whatever we do, whether it is good or bad, or whether we are doing is at par with rest of the world, that we can come to know only when we do the audit and the quality improvement. So this is very important. And therefore, good practice should always be routinely shared with our colleague. And to make such team, I hope that this presentation will be able to throw some highlight about launching the nutritional support team in the hospitals across the Nepal. So to summarize my presentation, medical nutritional therapy protocol is very simple. We do the nutritional assessment on arrival. We identify the nutritional risk levels. We refer them to the skilled, technically trained nutritional care professionals. Then there is a supervision and the documentation of the nutritional intervention and providing all culturally healthy therapeutic diets. And then that is very important is to monitor, review, and reassess. So these are all I thought very important point to highlight to sensitize all of you about the role of clinical nutrition in critical care setup. Point apart, you all already know that very few members from Nepal are a member of this European Society of Clinical Nutrition and Metabolism. There is an Aspen LLL program which is known as the Aspen Leonardo da Vinci Lifelong Learning Program. The registration is free for all. You can register yourself by visiting either the European Society website, aspen.org, or you can register yourself on the llnutrition.com. All the online education is free for all. You can download the PDF files and store in your computer, and you can read. You can even take a printout for yourself. It's all copyright protected material, but there is enough scientific literature is available free for all. Apart from the online learning, European Society of Clinical Nutrition and Metabolism, they conduct live or the webinar lifelong learning courses. The duration is 4 hours for one such topic. There are 3 to 4 lectures. Then there is a 1 hour of case discussion, followed by 30 MCQ question examination. And the passing grade in live exam is 24 out of 30 correct answer. And passing score for webinar is 23 out of 30. And each participants, they receive the European Society Lifelong Learning Certificate. If they pass the exam, they get the certificate of credit. And if they are not able to successfully clear the exam, they are able to get the certificate of attendance. So friends, medical nutritional therapy in ICU is like this cartoon. The European Society was, when it was started, like in the 19th century, 8th decade, was very small society with a group of small European countries. And then over a period of time, it became a very large organization with now almost 69 countries which are member to the European Society. IAPN is sitting on the top. And this is the dietitians, Nepal Dietetic Associations. And you can see the nurses and the critical care physicians. So these dietitians, they are taking immense tasks to balance the nutrition support in the critical care setup. So thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity. And thank you for your patient listening.
Thank you, Dr. Ashwin, for your important insights in